My name is Norm Volsky, your host, and this is the Digital Health Heavyweights Podcast. Hello, welcome to the Digital Health Heavyweights Podcast with your host, Norm Volsky. Today we will be interviewing Kimon, who has a very interesting background in the digital health space and is one of the real innovators in the market. So welcome and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks very much, Norm. It'll be fun. Actually, I think this is a great way to start. You've got the boxing gloves. I tell my team, by the way, they're probably in some cases too young. All entrepreneurs do the rope-a-dope, Muhammad
Yep.
Ali. So you get beaten, you get beaten, you get beaten, and you make sure you tire them out and you come back out.
That's really good advice. That was the George Foreman fight, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the rope-a-dope.
Excellent. Love that. That's a really good analogy and a great way to get started. So, interestingly enough, Kim, I've done work with a couple of companies that you've started, but we really haven't met before. So,
No.
I did a bunch of work for Livongo for many years, and also, have and currently do work for Vivante. So, I think a thank you is in order. Thank you for building these great companies and having a great idea that's turned into a couple really successful companies, and I've enjoyed a ton working with those two groups. So thanks first and foremost.
They're both great companies that solve a really important problem, an unmet need, certainly in diabetes. And then, the way that Vivante with digestive conditions that we discovered was really a huge issue that was unmet. So thanks, by the way, I appreciate it.
Yeah, you've done a lot for patients everywhere. So I'll be the first to thank you, and I'm sure there will be many more to come. So, first and foremost, we've never met before.
Yeah.
Tell me about, your story. Where did you grow up? Tell me about the origins of yourself.
Well, look, I identify myself as Greek, a Greek American. My parents immigrants. My mother is actually Greek from Egypt. And
Mhm.
so, I grew up a very sort of privileged background in trying to break into the American way. And so, grew up in California. My brother's a politician. He was the treasurer of the state of California and ran for governor. And so, he's been in politics for a long time. And I was lucky. I went to boarding school because that was a thing to do in the '60s if you were trying to break into the blue blood stuff. Uh, and then I went to college during the late '60s and early '70s, where there was a lot of turmoil and things, and so I was always interested in science, interested in medicine and science, and so I first actually majored in Russian and Russian literature. Spent actually a year in the Soviet Union at the time, and then came back and realized I didn't want to work for the CIA, but I decided that I would actually that was the only job that was available
Mhm.
that I would actually go into science, and so that's what I did. So that's kind of my background, and after that, I was really in academics until really sort of my mid 40s, and my wife was kind enough, who's a physician, to say, "Look, do what you really like to do," and that was it. That was the end of it. So that was company number one, and I'm on company number seven. So, and we're still married after so many years, and so she can do the rope a dope pretty well too.
That's fantastic. Where did you guys meet each other?
In New York, actually. So she was at Cornell. She was doing a fellowship. She's a pediatric endocrinologist. Hence,
Mhm.
that's part of the reason I got into diabetes. She keyed me up to the problem, and so we met in New York, and then we moved here to Houston. I took a little of a stint to go help form a medical school in the UK in Durham. That was a long distance marriage. She was here in Houston, and so we were going back and forth for about 5 years, and then I said, okay, well, I guess I'm going to have to move back. And that's when I started my first company in biotech.
That's fantastic. Um, just curious, I've noticed that, some of the companies you've founded have had development teams, based in Greece.
Yeah.
How much time have you spent in Greece?
Um, well, actually, with Vivante, I probably spent a fair amount. And actually, the reason there, that was during, we formed Vivante um, actually during the economic crisis of Greece. Greece really kind of went bankrupt, almost
Mhm.
like the U.S.
I
might have.
remember
Yeah, and so I thought that I would actually try to do something. Livongo, we had a big hit. So I thought that it would be good to be able to invest in Greece and to be able to reverse the brain drain. Because, once intellectual capital leaves a country or a company, and actually same thing with a company, then
Mhm.
really it starts to go downhill. So I said, why don't we just hire these really, really smart guys and start a company that looked at American healthcare, and that was it. So, but I spend I'm a Greek citizen as well, so I spent a lot of
Mhm.
time there, and I'm a very big believer in actually trying to retain intellectual capital. So, spent a lot of time. My wife is Greek as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. I have a special place in my heart for Greece. I had 2.5 weeks of my honeymoon there. It was great. I went
Good.
to a handful of the Greek islands. Interestingly enough, the first day my wife and I got there for our honeymoon, we were in Athens, and there was a 4.1 earthquake that day. So I was walking, I was going to get her flowers, on my way back, I had flowers in hand, and I like had this weird sensation. I didn't know what was going on, but like I felt wobbly. I thought it was me. I thought it maybe I was dehydrated, just had a flight,
You
or
just
maybe I
got
was
married,
going
Norm.
down.
You just got married, by the way. There was no physical earthquake. You just got married. You felt a little woozy, a
Uh,
little wobble.
well, then the telephone pole started
You
shaking,
you
and
didn't
I
do the
knew
right
something
control. You didn't do the right control experiment, by the way.
there. It's good. It's good advice. Um, yeah, marriage has been very smooth sailing since, but it started off with a bang. In terms of you mentioned your wife is an endocrinologist. It's always good to have an expert in the house. As you're building a company, kind of walk me through what inspired you to create Eos Health, which a lot of
Yeah.
people don't know. Like Eos became Livongo.
And it really sort of permeates almost all of the companies that I do. I am a scientist by training, so I'm not looking at the economic model. I'm actually trying to look at how you solve a clinical problem. So when I came back from the UK, I didn't want to go into academics or back into academics, so I took a job. I had an MBA as well, and so I took a job in a hospital called St. Luke's, the Texas Heart Institute. And I won't make this too long, but they were doing about 90,000 catheterizations a year. It was just an incredibly busy service. So they said, Kim, we'd really like to increase this to 120,000. Some science, business, operations. And so I had to design actually a suite where they had swivel tables so that they could do 120,000 cardiac catheterizations, about one every couple of minutes. But what I realized was that about 60 to 70% of these folks had diabetes, and I said, this is silly. I mean, you get to a heart catheterization, for example, a pretty invasive procedure, and you have diabetes. There has to be something before that.
Mhm.
So I said, okay, I'm not going to do this anymore because I'm too far down the line. I had $5,000 to spend. I asked my wife, and I said, look, here's what it seems to me. What you need to have, and this really penetrates even the women's health company that I developed in Vivante, is a multidisciplinary approach, and you need to have a one-stop shop, at least for diabetes. And people, what they would call them diabetics, and we changed that. Needed to go have eye care. They needed to have foot care. They needed to have nutrition. They needed to understand how to do, insulin management. And they had to go to 5 or 6 different providers. And so as they said, these people are non-compliant. Well, if you're a school teacher, you can't go to 5 different people. And so
Mhm.
I built our first diabetes center. I built it here in Houston. It was a beautiful design, no white coats. I had a very large atrium where people who had diabetes could congregate and they could actually meet. It was a community. But then I had stations around essentially where they would have an endocrinologist. I had a laboratory. I had a pharmacy. I had nutrition. I had eye care. They had foot care so they could get everything they wanted. And I'll tell you how Livongo came about and all of this and even the business model. So the beauty of that is that someone could come in and they could get everything done essentially. On the business side or the clinical side, we could have the continuity and the coordination of care that we needed, right? Because you didn't need to go to 10 different providers. And the third, on the business side, you could capture all the revenue streams that were associated with that. So I had diabetes centers. We grew organically. I populated about 16 in Houston, then moved to Phoenix and Las Vegas. They were about $500,000 to build and to get profitable. So that was done on cash flow. So I said to myself, there's got to be a better way to do this to reach more people. And that's when I started to think about digital health. This was in 2005, by the way. Cell phones were just coming out, and I'm going to show you one or two. But the second thing is that I was able to actually go to the HR and the benefits, and because we kept all the things, we were able to capitate the care. So Mercer, Houston Independent School District, Aetna, and I teamed up. So instead of spending $10,000 for someone in diabetes, we capped it at $3,500. So for public entities, that was really great. I got employers to come. We capped it. Then we started to expand. And that's where Livongo came in 2006, 2007. We said we needed a way to expand. Let's use technology to to virtualize this, and so that we could get clients who had geographically dispersed populations. And my first one there was Office Depot, because they had associates all over. So we just took the physical clinical model that we had developed with Aetna in our centers, and then just virtualized it to cell phones. And that's really the origins of it, how we developed it.
That's incredible. You have a prop, you have a cell phone
Yeah, I don't think anybody in your audience would know this. This is what we first used in 2006.
that looks like the phone I had in high school.
Yeah, maybe. Then, and that was in 2006. Then this guy came out. This was the talk of the town. It was the Motorola Razr, right?
Oh yeah.
And what we did here, essentially, this was in 2007, I built a little thing right here, essentially, that would snap right into the USB port. And this is where you would have the diabetes strip. So I tried to make that. And then I went to this guy in 2008, where I took a conventional J&J meter, one touch, and put it into this. And this was the ultimate. This was what we called the glucophone. This was a regular phone, regular flip phone. And I got this FDA approved, and we would just have this insert, for example, and we did it for the iPhone. So this was the original one, essentially, that we did all the way until about 2008, that we used, and Office Depot employees were carrying and stuff. And then we had to go to a different model, of course, and a different way of looking at things. But it was fun. It was great technology. It was fun to do.
Talk to me a little bit more of when the light bulb went off to work in benefits and sell to benefits.
Well, we with Eos and Livongo, I mean, before Livongo, we really, because we could capture, all of these different, the coordination, we could really reduce costs immediately, right? Because if these folks would go to a cardiologist, they'd get tests. They'd go to an endocrinologist, they'd get tests. They would go to a nutritionist, they'd get tests. All these duplicate costs. So it was really no brainer, by the way, when you came in. And so, we just, like I do now, even in the women's health, we're all data driven, a lot, and I think a lot of people in the digital health think, oh, well, you have a great program and it's just access. Actually, it comes down to using this technology to be able to render good care and to reduce the cost. And so we took all the data, their claims data. We looked at where we could take digital technologies and reduce those costs, right? So they didn't have to go to 10 different providers. And then came with a package price where we began to take risk in 2005. We said, okay, we use the mobile phone, with our clinic people, because they didn't need to come in all the time. We could monitor their blood sugars, we could reach out to them, we could call them, and all that type of stuff. So that was the beginning, I think, of digital health, where we could monitor in between visits and capitate the costs through benefits. And the benefits guys liked that. Mercer liked it. We had a national contract with Aetna. The school districts liked it because, they only have a limited tax base. So that's how we got into it. And we were just employer driven in the very beginning.
That's incredible. At the time, was anyone else going at risk?
No. And again, because we knew the clinical aspects of diabetes, how you manage diabetes, and to be able to have what the standard of care plus, we could go into claims. We developed the algorithms way back then. So we knew where we could fill in the gaps and where we could save money and we could do that and still have good care. But no one was doing it at the time. And it was a no-brainer because, 10,000 to 3,000. Let these guys take the risk and give me better care.
I love that. And a lot of companies love it as well. That's a huge advantage of shortened sales cycles across
Yeah.
multiple market segments to, share the risk or even take on full risk. Really shows that, hey, we're confident in our product. We're
Right.
confident we can deliver. We're confident we can save you money. And we're willing to put some skin in the game, which is great. At the time, your team sold Office Depot, and that was your first commercial
Yeah.
customer. How large was the team? How many people were working there?
Well, this was a typical type of startup. We were pretty tough. We thought we were pretty tough. We
Mhm.
were about 5 people, but it was worse than that. Because those are the fun parts. But then actually, I think what is the analogy? The dog caught the bus or something like that. We had a national contract with Aetna.
Mhm.
So we first did Office Depot, then we had school districts all over, and then we had the state of Arizona, and then we had the state of Washington, then we were using digital methods to state of Alaska, and then I think there were 6 of us. Um, and so,
Who were
um,
these other people? What were their skill sets?
well, let's see. Alex Batoon and Richard Hassemeyer were both engineers.
Mhm.
We had 2 people who were doing customer service. It was me selling and doing whatever I did. And
Yeah.
then those were the skill sets. I think we all did a lot.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I'm sure everyone wore a lot of hats.
it was fun though. I mean, getting out mobile phones. A couple hundred mobile phones. We were packing them, testing them, putting SIM cards in. So it was. Um, but as everybody knows, sometimes that's a great thing because you want to get contracts. But it was a near-death experience in some cases because it was hard to keep up, and it was pretty expensive because we were burning more than we were bringing in, of course.
Mhm. Yeah, no, it's never easy,
Yeah.
especially as you're growing and scaling. We look now and say, "Oh, it was a very successful endeavor," and at the time, or even you looking back on it, like, hey, could have gone either way. There was
Oh, it
definitely some
definitely.
inflection points. So, talk to me about some of those challenges and those first you know, challenges or roadblocks that you hit? What were some of the things you encountered? Some of which you expected, some that maybe you didn't expect.
Well, I think, and I see it now, and it's something even after the time of experience. Not all contracts are good contracts. Number one. And not those challenges. I mean, in the very beginning, you say, "Oh, I got a contract," or "I've got a pilot study." It's just, woohoo, that's really great, right?
Mhm.
It's executing on that, number one, and then number two, if you're outcomes driven, to make sure that you get the outcomes, and those take some time. So I think the challenges are, and I think the challenges are for a lot of folks, is it just doesn't end with a sort of a solution that you had. It just
Mhm.
doesn't. There are a lot of digital health companies that think they've got a great solution out there. They don't know what the ROI is going to be. They just think it's wonderful. You have to get the ROI. It has to fit into a clinical thing. And so I think those are the things that we learned. And that time constants, it takes 6 to 9 months to see any clinical effect. So I think the challenges are not all contracts are good contracts. Not all revenue lines are good revenue lines.
Mhm.
Those are the things. Then I think the third really is we were lucky in the very beginning, and although I've experienced with Vivante and even the women's health company, it's really the nature of the team. Startups are not for everybody.
Mhm.
They just aren't. It's a tough go, and some people get bummed out and all that type of stuff. It is a tough go.
Yeah, I mentioned with my last guest, Michael from EHIR, what we both kind of recognized and realized is most successful founders are optimists by nature. And they might have 99 things that go wrong in a day, but if they have one positive thing, they focus on the positive. Um, and I think that really is just You got to
Yeah.
have that innate in your personality to just deal with a lot of rejection and still see either solutions or positivity and progress in especially challenging times.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I think at least in the last couple of years, it's been accentuated a lot. Because
Mhm.
you're beaten around. There aren't, it's really tough. And the area in digital health is crowded. There's just a lot. It's hard for employers to really see who's real and who's not real, who's got outcomes. And so there's a lot of noise right now. And so a lot of founders are sort of really pushing. They're pushing against a much steeper hill than we had in the very beginning because
Mhm.
it's hard to get differentiated. So yeah, there's just a lot. There are 99 challenges and setbacks in a day, and maybe one good one.
Well, focus on the good. In terms of where EOS was when it transitioned into Livongo, when it
Yeah.
went from one company name to another, where was the business at? Like, how many employees? What were some of the recent successes the company had before they kind of rebranded?
We had developed the meter in one form, actually. It looked like this, actually. Um,
Mhm.
we had developed the meter and we were using the meter and beginning to distribute it. It hadn't been FDA cleared as a meter. And so it was a success because, well, there were two parts of the success as I remember. It was 2008, 2009. Qualcomm invested in a company called Telcare, 90 million.
Mhm.
And I said, "Oh my God, we're dead." We were down to I think our last 20 or $30,000, and I said, "Oh, we're done." 90 million. I said, "We can't compete." We looked at each other and I said, "Look, what do we got to lose?" And so we kept on building it and doing a couple of other things. So we're at 2008. We were kind of at a low point. We had all these contracts. I mean, we had a lot of contracts. We had Assurion, Cytel, State of Washington, State of Arizona. We had Aetna. I had a couple United contracts, and so that was successful, I think, and we had actually proven the business model. But money's unlimited. We were at that point, and then bang, Qual comes out and say, I think this is the next area is diabetes and remote management. So that was a tough one. So in 2008, we went out. 2008 that was tough, and then 2012. I set up a center at University of South Florida, a diabetes center, because I wanted a diabetes center, and a guy named Steve Glasgow, and everybody knows Steve. And Nicole Johnson, who was a big spokesperson for diabetes, a former Miss America. Anyway, the long and short of it is that we had good success with customers. We had a good contract. We had good outcomes. We were really low on money, so we were doing a lot of stuff. And then in 2012, I connected with Glenn, and really he became Seven Wires became our first outside investment.
Okay.
And so that was kind of a transition point because I went and I sought out Glenn. He came from the University of South Florida. In other words, we were using all scripts at USF.
Okay.
And in
And that was
December,
the connection, and that was post all scripts going public for 4 billion plus.
exactly. Well, he had just left as CEO, he and Lee,
Mhm.
on 2012. And so Steve said, "Why don't you just give him a call?" I called him. I said, "Why do you want to be doing electronic medical records when you can be helping people?"
Mhm.
And that was it. So it was, that was kind of the early success. We had the business model and the remote model done, and I wanted to bring on someone board with the extraordinary talents that Glenn has,
Mhm.
and then investment. So
Funny sidebar, and then I'll ask you a follow-up question to what you just shared. In my career, Livongo was my first client in employer tech. Prior to that, I was on the hospital software side
oh
of
yeah,
my firm. When I joined my firm, the gentleman who hired me, he was like 5 years older than me, 4 years, 5 years, something like that. And he had a big head start on me, and he was my mentor, and he taught me the business. But he's the guy in that space. So when we'd go to HIMSS, I'd be his sidekick, and a couple of other colleagues would come. But he was the guy. So at a point in my career where I really wanted to grow and establish my own practice area, I said, Mike, I love the business. I love working with you. Like your mentorship's been awesome. I want to do something in healthcare that doesn't step on your toes. She's like, how about you focus on outside the four walls of a hospital? And I hear about this company, Livongo, and I practically stalked their executive team. Didn't get Glenn or Lee to respond, but Jim personally did.
Oh, Jim is.
Met him at HIMSS in Las Vegas. I think Glenn took the team on a helicopter and then to like David Copperfield's personal VIP room before the magic show. I remember it very vividly. And I, had a good talk with Jim, and he said, "Yeah, we'll be in touch," and stayed in touch with him pretty regularly. And then he asked me, like, "Hey, I need you to find me salespeople." I said, "Great." He's like, "I need them to sell to employers." I'm like, "I don't know what that means." So that's kind of how I found the space. And
Yeah,
when he asked me that, I had a decision to make. Like, hey, do I just stick to what I'm good at, or do
yeah,
I take this leap of faith? And really, what compelled me to do it was the fact of their reputation. The fact that Glenn and Lee had been so successful at Allscript. I said, hey, whatever they're doing, I'm going to bet it's successful and I'm going to give this a shot. It was a lot of risk and time and energy to learn like a new market I was unfamiliar with, but really glad I did. So let's go back
yeah,
to, when you met Glenn and the Seven Wire folks.
yeah,
Talk
yeah.
to me about like how their involvement and your idea and their like experience building a business, like how that morphed together to really like take the business to heights that, again, without institutional investment, it would have been hard to do.
Yeah. Well, there was two things. So when we got the first investment, I mean, it was not only a relief, but we also had other people, and I think we were a team of about 12 at that point, 12 or 14. But we were able to bring on some other folks, onto the team in sales as well. And I think Randy Foreman is a good example, if you know Randy, and
I know
and Jim
Randy well.
and Jim came on. They're both,
Yeah.
and I'm going to make a sidebar on that. Part of building the companies and is really culture and team, and I've made mistakes in that respect many times. But that really gives you the sustainability, and that's where Glenn is really good at. Glenn and Lee are good. They can build the right culture and the right team, and scale it. I think is really the thing, because Livongo was fun, right? It was a good mission, but it was fun. So
Mhm.
in 2013, it was the first investment, outside investment. Glenn was on the board, and then shortly after that, we got an investment from General Catalyst. Um, and I remember distinctly, I really twisted Glenn's arm. And I'll tell you what Glenn told me. I twisted his arm as I was actually in Greece at the time. And I said, look,
Mhm.
you know, I'm not sure if I threatened. I said I was going to walk away, whether it mattered or not. I said, you've got to be the CEO of this company. No, I'll think about it. No, you got to be the CEO of this company. It was a small little company. He hadn't been in a small little startup.
Mhm.
And so I really twisted his arm. And later on, he told me, he says, "Look, he says I'm a good salesman, but you're better." And and so
That's a
um,
bold claim.
it is, and I say it as a compliment. And so in 2015, he decided to do it, and I became chief scientific officer. We'd already had the contracts, and they were expanding, and Jim came on and all that. Jim came on to EOS first, by the way, and so did Randy.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah, they were already there. They were employees of EOS. And then we went through this neat exercise about renaming it. And I always actually liked living on the go. And we had Steve, the namer, come up with Livongo plus a bunch of other names.
Mhm.
And so Glenn became the CEO. And I was delighted because I knew it was going to be scaled then. And I knew that the culture was going to be really conducive to that scaling. And
Mhm.
it was just a fun place to be, because that's how he does things. And so, the rest is history.
Yeah, and since I got a very close look at what it was like under the hood, I placed, over a dozen people at Livongo over probably a 4-year period. Um, Everyone I talked to does say it was fun, and it was maybe the most fun they've ever had in their
Yep,
career. But I
it
think
is.
what's interesting is they also said it was the most taxing. It was the hardest they've ever worked, and it wasn't because like they were forced to; they wanted to. And I
Yeah,
think that's what really is special about that company is the rate at which you worked and the pace of like the entire organization
Right.
rowing in the same direction. And I think that starts at the top. I think without your work ethic and Glenn's
Yeah.
work ethic, like it doesn't work. But if the leaders are working night and day to make this business successful, it's hard for someone at the VP level or the director level or any level to not follow, that lead. So I think it's really important when someone's building a business to, have the leader work as hard or harder as everyone else they're asking to work. And
Yeah.
I think you guys did a really, really good job of that. Just from my outside
No,
perspective, I
that's
noticed.
really true. I think what was unusual about Glenn, he's a startup scaler, so that's kind of an unusual combination. I didn't think I could scale it to the level he could. So whether that was an early recognition of my limitations, I like starting at the ground zero and building. And so, and there's no job that's too small to do, right? You just do
Mhm.
everything, just because. And so, if you're leading by example, that's what it is. You're right. I think everybody worked hard and they did things that they might not have normally done. Period. It was good.
And walk me through once you became chief scientific officer to, what that time was like from the transition to CEO and founder, and, eventually moving on and starting Vivante.
Well, one of the things is that this solution is science based. It wasn't just sort of a tech based, and when I mean it
Mhm.
was science based, is because it was really geared towards on the back end of looking at all the outcomes. So my first role there, before Jenny Schneider came on, was
Mhm.
really trying to make sure that it was clinically robust, scientifically robust, data robust, outcomes robust, and all of that type of stuff. So that was one thing. And then publishing, for example, we published 2 or 3 papers using a very unusual method, a reference method. It was called carbon 13 to measure glucose for the FDA. And so that was my role to sort of finish up the foundation, because after that, look, it was scaling for sales, scaling for, once you get that foundation done, and even today, by the way, the product hasn't changed. It really hasn't changed. The
Mhm.
meter's the same, the back end and the data, the calling of the nurse, the triggers, all of those types of things. It's not any different. So I think that was the contribution I did there. And then ultimately, they didn't need me. I mean, why should I stick around? What am I going to do? There was really nothing that I could contribute anymore, and I wanted to do something different.
Okay. And talk to me about what gave you the inspiration to start Vivante.
I've been looking at I've been looking at claims for a long time, and they come from the claims that either come from some of the brokers or consultants, and they have oncology, cardiovascular disease. They have diabetes. They rank them in terms of how many people and how many, what the cost is. But there was always this category that said other. And I said, well, what the heck is this other category, right?
Mhm.
And when I started to look at it, I started to see that, first of all, it was about 70% female. And that kind of, second of all, it really was what I would call, and I've coined the term, what I would call invisible, neglected, and stigmatized diseases, many that
Mhm.
had an immune substrate. So things like chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, lupus, Lyme's disease. And if you look through the claims, and we did this in the Women's Health Company, you can follow the journey of these people. These are undescribed conditions that they might see 10 or 15 providers trying to look for a diagnosis. And they don't get any set. They have, millions of tests or dozens of tests done. And then, what they end up on are antidepressants. So IBS is one of them, and irritable bowel syndrome, for example, and inflammatory bowel disease are ones, because, a lot of them, they say it's in your head, right?
I can
But it's not.
promise you it's not. I
It's
have
not.
it myself. My wife has it. We can
It's
go into
not.
using Vivante and getting some great results, but I just
It's
want to
not.
get there.
It is not in your head, right?
Mhm.
But the system is not geared to that. So I first did the following. It was really one of the most fun I had. And it's something why I got into women's health too, is I did a tour of the country. There's this suffering in silence. So these women, they look good on the outside, or they say that they look fine on the outside, but they're suffering on the inside. And gastroenterologists, for example, in the digestive, they don't pay any, they don't have nutrition. They want to scope primarily, and they want to do the procedures. And so I said, we need to have a multidisciplinary type of environment that treats a very broad spectrum of conditions, whether it's digestive, because it's the same substrate,
Yep.
or immune, like chronic fatigue. And that means some behavioral therapy, it means nutrition, it means a variety of different things. And so that's why I formed it. I said I wanted to fill in that gap, an unmet need of people who were kind of dismissed by the medical system. And that's why I started on that.
Am I remembering correctly? I think I saw your team at NBGH down in San Diego. I think you spoke on the last day of the conference. And if I'm not mistaken, some of your company had shirts that say, like, we talk shit about healthcare. Is that correct? Some sort of that?
Yeah, it is actually.
That was good. I remember it to this day.
We had those, and we actually wore them. It was also at a Rock Health thing, I think. Yeah, it was fun. Well, we wanted to start out sort of off the blocks because no one really wants to talk about digestive. That no one talks
Mhm.
about poop, and no one wants to talk about any of that stuff. And so it's a taboo subject, stigmatized. But I'll tell you, there's a lot of suffering going on, a lot.
100%. Like, I personally am someone who deals with a gastrointestinal disorder, as does my wife, as do, many people in my family. Um, and I wanted to do something about it. I was fatigued, I was bloated, I was, you'd see things on your skin. Like, there's a lot of things that are impacted. So I said, you know what? Like, I don't want to feel fatigued or bloated or sick any longer. So I went to a gastroenterologist. We did a scope, we did a colonoscopy, and he sat me down. He said, Norm, like, I think a huge part of your issue is your diet, the foods you're eating. You're not overweight, but I can see the inflammation. It's like, what are your standard meals? I kind of walked through like what a day in the life was. And I come from a family of eaters. Our whole family surrounds like, okay, what did you have for dinner last night? What's for lunch when we see each other? That type of thing. I was of the opinion that if you didn't have meat on the plate, it is a snack, like by definition. And my doctor said, Norm, like, I want you on a plant-based diet. Like, I want you eating at least 80% of your meals completely plant-based. No meat, no dairy. We did find out I was lactose intolerant
Oh, wow.
during some of the testing. So I did that change. It was drastic for me. It was definitely uncomfortable just from a social standpoint.
Yeah.
But I eat completely different. I feel better than I ever have. I hardly eat meat. I've really enjoyed the foods I make. But if you look at what I eat now compared to what I ate 10 years ago, it is night and day. My parents actually think my wife like put some like voodoo on me. She was like always like pretty much vegan and ate some fish. And they think like, oh, she got in his head and she convinced him to do this, but it wasn't any peer pressure. It was purely just to, feel
Well,
better,
I'm
be
glad to
more
hear that.
productive.
I'm glad to hear that actually, because it does. I mean, look, I mean, it affects every aspect of your life. It
It
it is
does.
it affects on how you work or where you can work and how you can work. It's how you can go out. I mean, it's something. And when
We
I
use
actually
the
started,
breathalyzer.
what's
We
that?
found we use the Vivante breathalyzer.
Yeah.
We found out which trigger foods we have. Like my wife found out she was very susceptible to onions. She tries to avoid that. There's certain foods I found out like, hey, that causes a lot of inflammation. So even, something you're not technically allergic to, like lactose, like that's easy. Like there's some, bad reactions, but even things that you're a little bit sensitive to are good things to know before you eat something, before you go on a plane or a long
Yeah.
trip or before a business meeting or whatever it may be. just to know how your body reacts to certain things on a ingredient level is really helpful. And I, thank you and the folks at Vivante who gave me that opportunity.
Well, yeah, the breath analyzer was another one. I mean, it's like the glucose meter. I wanted to develop something that people could actually get feedback, right? I mean, and so you'd like to know it. You'd like to know what's good, what's bad, for example. And we even did the microbiome at the time as well. So anyway, yeah. So in that respect, it was really a need to be able to take that category that was undescribed. And as I said, actually, 70% are women, and that's in part the reason I got into women's health, actually, or was interested in women's health. But
Mhm.
um, it's a big problem to solve, and there's a lot of Americans who actually have that issue, like you, surprisingly.
Yeah, tens of millions. It's pretty prevalent between IBS, IBD, ulcerative colitis, and Crohn's, things like that. So, what are you most proud of? Since kind of building two very successful companies. I think Eos slash Livongo and Vivante. Like Livongo started earlier and
Yeah,
obviously has been more commercially successful just because it had a quicker start. I'm actually of the belief that I think Vivante can be just about as big. I think it
yeah,
solves a huge issue,
yep.
major cost reduction and cost savings. So, what are you most proud of after, the last decade in this space that hasn't been around that long?
I come from, an academician, so I love to teach, and I love to see young people do well in and feel uncomfortable, in a new area because they're experimentalists. I'm a big experimentalist. So with Livongo, by the way, um, there were a lot of young people who did really well. They did really well career-wise. They did really well financially. And that is the single most pleasing thing that I think I've ever seen. And so to me, that's the best. To me, that's the best. It's not the
Which are the
money.
people you're thinking about? Like, I know who you're probably thinking.
Well,
Like a Dan Nardi, Jason McAleer, Aaron Pure, like a Swati Kapadia. Like those people are like probably the people you're thinking about.
almost. I saw a lot of them about 3 weeks ago when we had our reunion.
Mhm.
Even I would say even people who are sophisticated like Randy. I mean, and so
Mhm.
Randy's a great guy. He deserved it. He worked hard. Rob Brooks was about that's kind of an interesting story because at the time we had EOS, we were about ready to sell it to the Jocelyn Center.
Mhm.
And so Rob Brooks was the son of John Brooks, who was the CEO at Jocelyn Diabetes at Harvard. And he was like number 5 or number 6. He had just graduated from college, and so he's still at Teladoc. I mean, he's a great example. A young guy who's done extremely well career-wise, financially. To me, that is absolutely fantastic. The second thing, although it's not in any particular order, um, when we had the diabetes centers, we actually probably treated in the first 3 years over 1 million people. Okay, and we
Wow.
did really well. And we had a couple of clients, which were Medicaid clients that came through. We would actually have bus stops where they would get on the bus essentially, and we would take them to the centers, for example, because they didn't have the transportation. I'm really proud of that because no one cares about these people. We even had people who were employed at a large Latino market throughout the state of Texas called Fiesta, and they did really well. Honestly, they did incredibly well. Where they could have been headed for amputations or losing their sight, it's changed their whole life. To me, that kind of patient care on a population base is really the most satisfying. So,
It was
the
worth all the hard work and the
it's
sleepless nights.
it's fantastic. Well, and the patience for my wife. I do this because I like it and because I see it,
Mhm.
and so Um, she allows me to do this with the ups and downs. And there are downs, by the way, even at my age, a lot of downs, and you're on the cliff, and she's still there.
Yeah. Many founders mention that, it's like building an airplane as you're flying it,
Yeah,
building a startup.
yeah.
So yeah, like there are always challenges there. So let's talk about the challenges, in terms of what are some of the greatest lessons you learned in scaling several of these very successful businesses? And what would be some of the biggest mistakes you've made that you'd say, hey, if I could do it all over again, I would have changed this or done this differently?
Yeah, I'll tell you where it comes down to, because even in my last startup, though, too, I would say it comes to the team. Again, startups are not for everybody. And again, I'll get back to where Livongo was fun and the team. Not that there weren't any sort of glitches there. And I'll tell you that the mistake is, I already mentioned one is really, going after contracts that really, they look good, but they're not so good, and you get caught into it because you're in the contract sort of hoop. We didn't have investors down our back, essentially, or VCs, but that could be really a problem because you're getting contracts that don't really have any value. But really, it comes down to the team. With EOS and Livongo, we were small enough. We were stretched incredibly thin, but we were really a humming team. I could hand off. I was doing tons of things, and Alex was doing tons of things, and Richard, Shari. We exchanged things. We were interchangeable in that respect. So it comes down to the team. The challenge is if you grow too fast because you think you need to have a job filled and you get the wrong people, you're done.
Hmm.
You're really done. And I've made those mistakes even recently where you think you need to hire and you need to expand quickly, right, to fill whatever it is. And that's a mistake. That's really a mistake. You need to ratchet back on the things you do, make sure you get the right team that's on board, right, and not sort of be over your skis, because these are partners for life, right? If there's a, break in the gear, you're done. So that's
Hmm.
one of the things. I've done that. I've made that mistake. I've hired too quickly, probably, not getting the right people in the right seats, the right culture, and that's more work than it's worth, I think. And so there is you don't need to go so fast because it'll come, and you need to make sure that the team is in synchrony. It's like any work environment, right?
Yeah.
We've all been there, right? We've all been
We
there.
sure have. Sure have. Who am I to argue in my profession that, hiring the right people is pretty crucial?
Well, you know that. You know better than anybody, right? And this is what you do, right?
Yeah.
And that's why folks like you essentially are absolutely essential, because founders and entrepreneurs are totally blind sometimes to that. And I mean that with all my heart. Is that it comes down to the team.
Yeah, and that's why I love working with early stage startups because the placements we're making are beyond impactful. Like, I have friends who recruit for Fortune 500 companies. And when ultimately it's a great business and a great career if you're doing that. But by placing one person in a Fortune 500 company, how much possibly could that increase the
Right.
productivity of the business and the, stock, whatever? If you're able to place a really talented operator or salesperson or someone to lead customer experience or
Right.
someone to lead the marketing function at an early stage company and they help them become market dominant, that's
Yep.
making a huge impact on whether the company's going to be successful or not. So that's what I obviously find very, very rewarding in my business is to work with these early stage companies that have great ideas, great visionaries that need talent around them to help execute that vision. So
100%. It's
should have
all the
known you earlier.
No, it's all the chemistry. You're 100% correct, and that chemistry can be really disrupted very easily. I've made those mistakes actually, even at my advanced, say, age, my maturity level.
I love it. Always learning. I think people who just see themselves as a lifelong learner tend to do, very, very well and, do some things that no one's ever done before. So, in terms of any other advice you'd give either current entrepreneurs are really early in their journey or someone who has always wanted to be one that hasn't made the jump yet, like what advice would you give to those types of folks?
Look, this is probably trite, but the fact is that again, we come to hiring. It's not for everybody, right?
Mhm.
People say they want to be in a high-paced startup, for example, and things. So startups are not right for everybody. And I think COVID, I probably accentuated it a lot because it was very frustrating. And I think the market now in digital health is very frustrating. There are a lot of great ideas. Um, there are a lot that really don't rise to the occasion of actually what I would call health solutions or things.
Mhm.
So I would say, I would say the thing is that you've got to be committed, absolutely committed. You're going to run out of money, no question. You're going to run out of money, and you're going to need to surround yourself with people who understand you're going to run out of money. And you need
Mhm.
to surround yourself with people who can be, when you have a little bit of money, who can be prudent with the money as well. And you need to stick around as a team. So I think the advice for an entrepreneur is that it's not a sprint; it's just a long haul, and you need to surround yourself with like-minded people because it can just fray at the edges and come apart very quickly. And that's a depressing thought, because you have these ideas that you want to execute, and you can't execute them unless you think you can execute them yourself. So you got to map it out. I'm a scientist, and I like to do what I call bench experiments. I like to think out the experiment,
Mhm.
and then come to the result. Either it works, the experiment, or it doesn't work, but at least I've laid it out.
Fantastic. I'm sure the people who stuck with you at EOS when you guys were running out of money were happy they did.
Well, there's a good example. We ran out of money. I turned to them and I said, "Listen, we don't have the salaries. Will you take options and shares?" And they said, "Absolutely." And that just made the world a difference. We went
And it
3 or 4
made a
months.
huge difference in their lives, I'm sure.
Yeah, 3 or 4 months without getting paid or anything like that. I never have paid myself in any of these companies, and so I'm always the last. But giving them options and shares, by the way, if they believe, that's the best test.
That's fantastic. Something I'm going to ask every guest on this podcast is how do you practice what you preach? How do you personally participate in health and wellness? Can you share what your exercise regimen is, or what types of foods you eat, and what do you do personally to make sure your health is in good standing?
That's a great question, actually. Okay, so I'm going to preface it the following. My dad is 101. He's very,
Wow, that's longevity.
yeah, he's ambulatory and none of that. He's really a quick wit, by the way, and he's funny. So I think I have a
Let's see where you
substrate.
get it from.
I think I have a substrate, and I'm 72. And so I still have, dark hair and still have my hair. And I think part of it is obviously the genetics. In terms of exercise, I love to walk. I love to hike. I eat Greek, right? I eat Mediterranean,
Mhm.
right? I'll eat meat, but I make my own olive oil, and so olive oil isn't everything. I don't eat deep fried stuff. So I think it's eating, as you said, right? Eating. I think I eat well. I just eat well, and I eat Greek style, like my
I
dad.
love the Greek cuisine. I'm a foodie. I actually eat a lot of Greek food myself. There's a blog actually called Olive Tomato. Great Greek recipes. I'll give them a shout out.
Is
I've
it? Yeah.
definitely made at least a dozen of their recipes. They're all great, really healthy, more filling than you'd
Yeah.
imagine. So
Yeah.
I'm asking you, like, what are your favorite Greek recipes? Like, what are your go-to things that you like to eat? I'll share mine after.
I make a zucchini. I would say melanzana moussaka. I
Ooh,
make that
love
all the
that.
time. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. And so I don't do it with eggplant, but I do it with squash. It's fantastic. And so
Mhm.
I like that. And I make a bunch of stuff. So, like I said, I make my own olive oil. I make about 4 tons of olive oil. And so, we just have a spigot of olive oil. Everything comes in olive oil.
That's good. That's good.
How about you?
Well, I had a cooking class during my honeymoon, so I learned some of the Greek recipes doing that. So I'm a big fan of grape leaves. So I eat
Oh,
grape leaves a good amount.
beloved, beloved.
Yes. So those are fantastic. I really like fava, which is like a
Yep.
yellow
Huh.
split pea
Yep. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
dish that kind of is like hummus, but a lot less savory and just really
Yeah.
light.
I know. I know fava. Yeah.
Really, really good. I don't know how to pronounce it, but I think it's Gigantes Plaki, which is like big butter beans and like a red tomato sauce. That's really good. And then also like big green
Good for
beans,
you.
very thick ones, in a red sauce with some potatoes. So I eat a lot of their stuff.
Good for you. You mean you mean you're talking about the runner beans, right?
Yeah, yeah, the large green beans, more like
Yep.
thick but like real thin. Those are good. There's like a lentil soup that's really
Yep.
really good. And then
For you.
one of the islands we went to was very famous for a chickpea soup that I make a good amount. So it
Good for
keeps
you.
me
Good for
healthy.
you. Good for you. Good for you. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting. That is very good. That's a good diet. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, there's an island actually in Greece where everybody, almost 90% of the population is over 100,
Mhm.
and it's attributed to a lot of their diet and walking. So that's all I do really. I used to play a
Yeah.
lot of tennis, but that's all my dad did.
Do you partake in wine as well? I know the Greeks love their wine.
Yeah, that's something I should probably cut out actually. But
Uh,
yes,
glass here or there is not too bad.
I do. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And Greek wines are doing really, really well actually. I thought about planting some vineyards at where our olives are actually, but it's a fair amount of work. Olives don't take any work at all.
That's nice. Very good. Any other ways you reduce stress? I think being a founder of startups, that's a very stressful place to be. What do you do to kind of reduce that stress other than walking?
Because I have a team in Greece and we've had teams, I usually start work around 3:30 in the morning. And
Wow.
so, yeah, and I'll work until maybe 7 or something like that. I like it. It's just the way I do. And it is pretty intense. And so, if I might take off a day, but then I'll go for maybe 4 days every couple of months. My youngest son will ask me to go hike at some exotic place, whether it's
Mhm.
volcano hiking or whether it's hiking in Quito or whether it's Island of Skye, and I'll do that. And then I don't bring a laptop, I don't bring a mobile, I don't do
Mhm.
anything like that. It's just like 4 days and I'm clear. And so then I can go for a couple of months after that. 3:30 in the morning to 7 at night. I'm good.
That's good. Like sprint, recharge.
Yeah.
What's your favorite hike you've ever been on?
Oh goodness. Well, oh, that's really a hard one.
Or favorite couple? You don't have to pick a
Well,
favorite.
we went to Iceland before Iceland got popular. I think Skye was really pretty cool. I like the island
Mhm.
of Skye when we went in the kind of the late winter. Um, yeah, and I think that was pretty. I think that was pretty cool. Costa Rica has been fine, but I like Skye. I think I like Skye. I think I like Skye the best.
Can I make a recommendation?
Yeah, yeah.
All right. It must have been 8 years, 7 years ago. It was right after I met my wife because I remember she was mad I went on this trip because I was leaving her for like a week. But I went out to the Alps and I went on a hike with my cousin, also named Norm. That's another story for another day. But the two cousins, Norm, we went on a hike called the Tour of Mont Blanc. So you fly into, I believe, Geneva,
Any of that, yeah,
then you take a train to Chamonix, France, or Chamonix, Switzerland. I forget. I
yeah.
think it's in France. And then you go in a full circle, and it's about 110 miles, and you do about 10 to 12 a day. And
Wow.
again, this is an elevation, so like my cousin
Wow.
told me like you should train for this, and I'm like, no, I ran cross country in high school, I'll be fine. On day one, I was a mess, and then I was like sore for every day after that until like the last couple. But anyways, some of the most amazing views you've ever seen. Every 10, 12 miles they have these like towns where you
Oh
can
yeah.
stay in a bed and breakfast, and they make you a dinner as you get there. You take a sleep, you sleep real well because you're exhausted, and then you wake up and they make you this like amazing breakfast, and then off you go to the next town. So it's a great combination of amazing views, strenuous exercise, but nothing too crazy. You might be sore, but like you can do it. And then the other thing that's really nice is you can do it at different levels. Some people just camp the whole way through and they're eating, you know, stuff out of a can. And then there are some that, do it a little bit more bougie, and they go out and they go to these like bed and breakfasts that have like 5-star meals. And then anything in between. So you can do it as fancy or as not fancy if you want. And just amazing views, and it's a good like 9 to 11 day hike, and you just feel a sense of accomplishment because you get all the way around. You finish where you start for the most part, and the last day is the most amazing view. Like you get to the top of the mountain and you're just looking over it, and really, really cool.
That sounds really great. Yeah, sounds really really good.
And in
I'd
those
have
10 days, part of it's in France, part of it's in Switzerland, and part of it's in Italy. So you hit 3 countries in this 110-mile journey. So in one area, you're eating spaghetti. The next, you're eating a croissant. So pretty cool.
Cool. That's pretty cool. Well, yeah, that sounds good. He's suggesting either we go to Ecuador or Oman. And so I don't know what we'll do, but anyway, but that's, kind of the stress reliever as well that
Great.
we do. So anyway,
Well, thank you so much for joining us, first and foremost.
thank
And,
you.
a special thanks to you in particular, because it's funny how, like, you meet people in your life and your career and, like, different things happen. If you never started EOS, I never meet Jim Pursley. I never enter this employer market. I wouldn't
Okay.
have built this, 10 plus person team that currently spends our whole day in this market. And who knows, maybe I'm still Mike's sidekick in healthcare software on the
No,
hospital side if that never happens. So again, thank you for, being a visionary and being a true entrepreneur in every sense of the word in this space. And, thank you for stepping into the ring with me.
thank you, Norm.
Appreciate everyone who joined and listened to this Digital Health Heavyweights podcast. And Kim, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for joining. Please like, comment, and subscribe below if you enjoyed it.